Hey guys, I know I was going to finish it all up in the other video, but it ended up taking a little bit longer time to read chapter 27 than I thought it would. So we're going to finish it up right now, okay? Here we go. Chapter 28. Only Charlie left. Ooh. Which room shall it be next? Said Mr. Wonka as he turned away and darted into the elevator. Come on, hurry up. We must get going. How many children are there left now? Little Charlie looked at Grandpa Joe, and Grandpa Joe looked back at little Charlie. But Mr. Wonka, Grandpa Joe called after him, there's only Charlie left now. Mr. Wonka stopped and stared at Charlie. There was a silence. You mean you're the only one left? Mr. Wonka said, pretending to be surprised. Yes, sir, whispered Charlie. Mr. Wonka suddenly exploded with excitement. My dear boy, he cried out, that means you've won! You've won! He rushed out of the elevator and started shaking Charlie's hand so furiously it felt like it would come off. Oh, I do congratulate you. I really do. I'm absolutely delighted. I had a feeling right from the beginning it was going to be you. Well done, Charlie. Well done. This is terrific. Now the fun's really going to start, but we mustn't dilly, we mustn't dally. There's less time now to lose than there was before. We have an enormous number of things to do before the day is out. Just think of the arrangements that have to be made. Goodness, at least we have the great glass elevator speed things up. Jump in, dear Charlie. You, Grandpa Joe, sir. Come on. Yes, no, after you. That's the way. Now then, this time I shall choose the button we're going to press. Mr. Wonka's bright, twinkling blue eyes rested for a moment on Charlie's face. Oh, I think something crazy's going to happen now, Charlie thought. But he wasn't frightened. He wasn't even nervous. He was just terrifically excited. So was Grandpa Joe. The old man's face was shining with excitement as he watched every move that Mr. Wonka made. Mr. Wonka was reaching for a button high up on the glass ceiling of the elevator. They both craned their necks to read what it said on the little label beside the button. It said, up and out. Up and out, thought Charlie. What sort of a room's that? Mr. Wonka pressed the button. The glass doors closed. Hold on, cried Mr. Wonka, and then wham! The elevator shot straight up like a rocket. Yippee! Shouted Grandpa Joe. Charlie was clinging to Grandpa Joe's legs, and Mr. Wonka was holding on to a strap from the ceiling, and up they went, straight up this time. Charlie could hear the whistling of the air outside the elevator as they went faster and faster. Here we go, said Grandpa Joe. Faster, cried Mr. Wonka, banging the wall of the elevator with his hand. Faster, faster. If we don't go any faster than this, we shall never get through. Get through what? Wait and see. I've been longing to press that button for years, but I've never done it until now. Oh, I was tempted many times. Yes, I was tempted. But I couldn't bear the thought of making a great big hole in the roof of the factory. But now it doesn't matter. Here we go. Up and out. You don't mean... You really mean, said Grandpa Joe, this elevator is... Yes, I do, said Wonka. You wait and see. Up and out. But it's made of glass. It'll break into a million pieces, said Grandpa Joe. I suppose it might, said Mr. Wonka, cheerful as ever. But it's pretty thick glass all the same. The elevator rushed on up, faster, and then suddenly, crash! The most tremendous noise of splintering wood and broken tiles came from directly above their heads, and Grandpa Joe said, Help! It's the end! We're done for! Mr. Wonka said, No, we're not. We're through. We're out. Sure enough, the elevator shot right up through the roof of the factory and was now rising into the sky like a rocket, and the sunshine was pouring in through the glass roof. In 5 seconds, they were 1,000 feet up in the sky. Have no fear, dear sir, said Mr. Wonka calmly to Grandpa Joe. He pressed another button. The elevator stopped. It stopped and hung in midair, hovering like a helicopter, hovering over the factory and over the very town itself, which lay spread out below them like a postcard. Looking down through the glass floor on which he was standing, Charlie could see the small, far-away houses and the streets and the snow that lay thickly over everything. It was a rather frightening feeling to be standing on clear glass high up in the sky. It made you feel that you weren't standing on anything at all. Are we all right? Said Grandpa Joe. How does this thing stay up? Candy power, said Mr. Wonka. 1 million candy power. Oh, look, there go the other children. They're returning home. Chapter 29, The Other Children Go Home. Oh, we must go down and take a look at our little friends before we do anything else, said Mr. Wonka. He pressed a different button and the elevator dropped low, and soon it was hovering just above the entrance gates to the factory. Looking down now, Charlie could see the children and their parents standing in a little group just inside the gates. I only see 3. Who's missing? I expect it's Mike TV, said Mr. Wonka. He'll be coming along soon, I'm sure. You see those trucks? Mr. Wonka pointed to a line of trucks parked in a line nearby. Yes, what are they for? Said Charlie. Oh, don't you remember what it said on the golden tickets? Every child goes home with a lifetime supply of candy. There's 1 truckload for each of them, loaded to the brim. Ah, there goes our friend Augustus Gloop. Do you see him? He's getting in the first truck with his mother and father. You mean he's really all right, even after going up that awful pipe? Asked Charlie. Oh, he's very much all right, said Mr. Wonka. He's changed, though. Used to be thicker. Now he's thin as a straw. Of course he's changed. He got squeezed in the pipe, remember? And look, there goes Miss Violet Beauregard, the great gum chewer. Seems as though they managed to dejuice her after all. I'm so glad. How healthy she looks. But she's still purple, said Grandpa Joe. So she is. There's nothing we can do about that. Good gracious, cried Charlie. Look at poor Veruca Salt and Mr. and Mrs. Salt. They're simply covered with garbage. And here comes Mike TV, said Grandpa Joe. Good heavens, what have they done to him? He's about 10 feet tall and thin as a wire. Oh, I'm afraid they overstretched him on the stretching machine, said Mr. Wonka. How very careless. But how dreadful for him, cried Charlie. Nonsense, said Mr. Wonka. He's very lucky. Every basketball team in the country will be trying to get him. But now, he added, it is time we left these 4 silly children. I have something very important to talk to you about, my dear Charlie. Mr. Wonka pressed another button and the elevator swung upwards into the sky. Chapter 30 and the last chapter. Charlie's Chocolate Factory. The great glass elevator was now hovering high over the town. Inside the elevator stood Mr. Wonka, Grandpa Joe, and little Charlie. Oh, how I love my chocolate factory, said Mr. Wonka, gazing down. Then he paused. Then he turned around and looked at Charlie with the most serious expression on his face. Do you love it too, Charlie? He asked. Oh, yes, cried Charlie. I think it's the most wonderful place in the whole world. I'm very pleased to hear you say that, said Mr. Wonka, looking more serious than ever. He went on staring at Charlie. Yes, I am very pleased indeed to hear you say that. Now I shall tell you why. He cocked his head to one side, and all at once those tiny twinkling wrinkles of a smile appeared around the corners of his eyes, and he said, You see, my dear boy, I have decided to make you a present of the whole place. As soon as you are old enough to run it, the entire factory will become yours. Charlie stared at Mr. Wonka. Grandpa Joe opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. It's quite true, Mr. Wonka said, smiling broadly now. I really am giving it to you. That's all right, isn't it? Giving it to him? Gasped Grandpa Joe. You must be joking. I'm not joking, sir. I'm deadly serious. But why would you want to give your factory to little Charlie? Listen, Mr. Wonka said, I'm getting old. I'm much older than you think. I can't go on forever. I've got no children of my own, no family at all. So who's going to run the factory when I get too old to do it myself? Someone's got to keep it going, if only for the sake of the Oompa Loompas. Mind you, there are thousands of clever men who would give anything for the chance to come into my factory and take it over from me, but I don't want that sort of person. You know, I don't want a grown-up person at all. A grown-up won't listen to me. He won't be willing to learn. He'll try to do things his own way and not mine. So I have to have a child. I want a good, sensible, loving child, one to whom I can tell all my most precious candy-making secrets while I'm still alive. So that's why you sent out the golden tickets, said Charlie. Exactly, said Mr. Wonka. I decided to invite 5 children to the factory, and the one I liked best at the end of the day would be the winner. Why, Mr. Wonka, stammered Grandpa Joe, do you really and truly mean you're giving the whole of this enormous factory to little Charlie? After all, there's no time for arguments, said Mr. Wonka. We must go at once and fetch the rest of the family. Charlie's father, mother, and anyone else that's in your family, they can all live in the factory from now on. They can help run it until Charlie's old enough to do it by himself. Now, where do you live, Charlie? Charlie peered down through the glass elevator at the snow-covered houses that lay below. Over there, he said, pointing. That little cottage right on the edge of the town. The tiny little one? Oh, I see it, said Mr. Wonka, and he pressed some more buttons, and the elevator shot down toward Charlie's house. I'm afraid my mother is not going to come with us, Charlie said sadly. Why ever not? Because she won't leave Grandma Josephine and Grandma Georgina and Grandpa George. Oh, but they must come too. They can't, Charlie said. They're very old and haven't been out of bed for 20 years. Then we'll take the bed along as well, with them in it, said Mr. Wonka. There's plenty of room in the elevator for a bed. You couldn't get the bed out of the house, said Grandpa Joe. It won't go through the door. Oh, nothing is impossible, said Mr. Wonka. You watch. The elevator was now hovering over the roof of the Bucket's little house. What are you going to do? Cried Charlie. I'm going right on in to fetch them, said Mr. Wonka. How? Through the roof, said Mr. Wonka, pressing another button. Oh, no, shouted Charlie. Crash went the elevator right down through the roof of the house into the old people's bedroom. Showers of dust and broken tiles and bits of wood and spiders and bricks and cement were raining down on the three old ones lying in bed. Each of them thought that the world had come to an end. Grandma Georgina fainted. Grandma Josephine dropped her false teeth. Grandpa George put his head under the blanket, and Mr. and Mrs. Bucket came rushing in from the next room. Save us! Cried Grandma Josephine. Calm yourself, my darling wife, said Grandpa Joe. It's only us. Mother, listen to what's happened, cried Charlie, rushing into Mrs. Bucket's arms. We're all going back to live in Mr. Wonka's factory, and we're going to help him run it. He's going to give it all to me, and... What are you talking about, child? Said Mrs. Bucket. Oh, just look at our house, said poor Mr. Bucket. It's in ruins. My dear sir, said Mr. Wonka, jumping forward, shaking Mr. Bucket warmly by the hand. I'm so very glad to meet you. You mustn't worry about your house. From now on, you're never going to need it again anyway. Who is this crazy man? Screamed Grandma Josephine. He could have killed us all. This, said Grandpa Joe, is Mr. Willy Wonka himself. It took quite a time for Grandpa Joe and Charlie to explain to everyone exactly what had been happening to them all day, and even when they all refused to ride back to the factory in the elevator. I'd rather die in my bed, shouted Grandma Josephine. So would I, said Grandma Georgina. I refuse to go, announced Grandpa George. So Mr. Wonka, Grandpa Joe, and Charlie, taking no notice of their screams, simply pushed the bed into the elevator. They pushed Mr. and Mrs. Bucket in after it, and then they got in themselves. Mr. Wonka pressed a button, the doors closed, Grandma Georgina screamed, and the elevator rose up off the floor and shot through the hole in the roof out into the open sky. Charlie climbed onto the bed and tried to calm the three old people who were still petrified with fear. Please don't be frightened, it's quite safe, he said, and we're going to the most wonderful place in the world. Charlie's right, said Grandpa Joe. Will there be anything to eat when we get there? Asked Grandma Josephine. I'm starving. The whole family is starving. Anything to eat? Cried Charlie, laughing. Oh, you just wait and see. And thus ends the story of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I hope you enjoyed hearing it as much as I enjoyed reading it to you. I love you guys so much, and I am so proud of you for all that you have accomplished this year. Have a wonderful summer.